I can still remember the smell of her perfume lingering in my car the morning. I dropped her off at JFK. It was one of those crisp October mornings in 2019, when the air had that mix of autumn chill and city exhaust, and the skyline looked almost too perfect against the pale sky. I had my hand on the steering wheel, my stomach fluttering with that bittersweet ache that always came whenever she left for a trip. I wasn't the type to get jealous or clingy, at least I didn't think I was. But something about airports always made me uneasy. They were places of goodbyes, of distance, of uncertainty. Her name was Emily Walker. She was 32 at the time, 2 years younger than me, and I thought she was the great love of my life. We had been together for nearly 6 years, living in a modest but warm 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, just off Flatbush Avenue. I'd grown used to our routines, the way she'd hum to herself when making coffee in the mornings, the little piles of books she left scattered around the living room, her quirky habit of folding laundry while listening to true crime podcasts. She wasn't perfect, but to me, she was perfect enough. That morning, she was flying out to what she told me was a conference in Chicago. Emily worked in marketing for a big fashion retail company. Forever 21 had just gone bankrupt that year, and her firm had been trying to scoop up some of their market share. I knew she traveled occasionally for work, usually to places like LA, London, sometimes even Paris, and I was proud of her. I was the steady one in our relationship, working as an IT consultant, which meant long hours behind screens, fixing other people's messes, but rarely traveling. She was the one who added color to our lives, who dragged me to art exhibits and convinced me to try overpriced brunch spots in Manhattan. As we pulled up to Terminal 4, she reached over and squeezed my hand. Her nails were painted a pale lavender, and I remember thinking how small and delicate her fingers looked wrapped around mine. She told me not to worry, that she'd call me as soon as she landed, that it was just 3 days and she'd be back before I knew it. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and tried to swallow the lump in my throat. It wasn't the first time I'd dropped her off for a trip, but for some reason, something in me resisted letting her go that morning. She wheeled her carry-on out of the car, adjusted her scarf, and waved one last time before disappearing into the sliding glass doors. I sat there for a while, watching people rush in and out of the terminal, feeling oddly empty. I shook it off, telling myself I was being silly. After all, this was normal. Couples traveled. People had jobs. I couldn't expect her to stay tethered to me like a balloon on a string. The drive back into Brooklyn was clogged with traffic, and I remember listening to a podcast about the upcoming 2020 election. The Democratic primaries were heating up. Biden, Sanders, Warren, all of them, and the host was speculating about who had the best chance of beating Trump. I wasn't really paying attention, though my mind kept drifting back to Emily. I wondered what she'd be doing that evening in Chicago. She'd be having dinner with colleagues or unwinding alone in a hotel room. I trusted her. I had no reason not to. When I got home, the apartment felt unusually quiet. I went about my routine, made coffee, opened my laptop, started working on a client's project, but there was this nagging emptiness in the pit of my stomach. It was as if I'd forgotten something important, or as if a storm was building far away, invisible but inevitable. Looking back, I think that was the first red flag. Not anything she did or said, but the way my body seemed to know something my mind didn't want to admit. Over the next 24 hours, everything seemed normal. She texted me from the plane, then again after she landed. She even sent a picture of her hotel room, a sleek, modern-looking space with a view of some city buildings. I glanced at it quickly, not really studying the details, just relieved to hear from her. I remember her saying she was exhausted, but had to prepare for the conference the next day. I wished her luck, told her I missed her, and went back to my evening. That night, though, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't unusual for me. I've had bouts of insomnia since my 20s, but this time it felt different. I tossed and turned, scrolling aimlessly through social media, reading about Brexit debates in the UK and skimming articles about the wildfires in California. My mind kept circling back to Emily, to her trip, to this vague unease that I couldn't shake. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up, groggy and unrested. And like I always did, I reached for my phone. There was no message from Emily yet, but that wasn't unusual. She wasn't much of a morning person. I opened Instagram, half asleep, and started scrolling. And then, as if the universe wanted to smack me awake, there it was, a new post from Emily. It wasn't a picture of conference halls or Chicago landmarks. It was a photo of her, smiling, her hair loose and wavy, standing in front of a famous fountain. Except it wasn't in Chicago. It was the Trevi Fountain in Rome. Rome, I blinked, sat up, and stared at the screen as if I'd misread it. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I knew that fountain. I'd been there once, years ago, during a college trip to Europe. There was no mistaking it, the carved marble, the turquoise water, the crowds in the background. It was Rome. My first thought wasn't even anger. It was confusion. Maybe it was an old photo she just happened to post now. People did that all the time. Throwback pictures, memories. But as I clicked on her story, my stomach dropped further. There were fresh clips of her walking down cobblestone streets, sipping espresso at an outdoor cafe, and tagging locations like Piazza Navona and the Colosseum. These weren't old. These were live. And they were from Rome. I sat there frozen, my hands shaking, my chest tight. I felt like the walls of the apartment were closing in on me. My girlfriend, the woman I'd just dropped off at JFK for a supposed work trip to Chicago, was in Rome. Why would she lie? Why would she say Chicago? And most importantly, who was she with? At that moment, I didn't have answers. All I had was the sound of my heart hammering in my ears, the cold sweat breaking out across my skin, and the sick realization that everything I thought I knew about Emily, about us, might have just shattered. And yet, instead of anger, what I felt most was disbelief. I told myself there had to be some explanation. There had to be. Because the alternative, that she had lied, that she had betrayed me, was too unbearable to face. Not yet. That was the morning my world quietly cracked, even before I admitted it to myself. I spent that entire morning in a haze, staring at her Instagram posts like they were some kind of cruel mirage. Rome. She was in Rome. My brain kept trying to twist the information into something digestible. Some harmless misunderstanding. Maybe she had a layover. Maybe she had a friend in Italy she was visiting after Chicago. But no, that made no sense. She had packed for 3 days. She had told me word for word that she'd be in Chicago for work. I kept replaying that moment at JFK in my head, her scarf wrapped around her neck, her lavender nails brushing against my hand, her kiss on my cheek. There was nothing in her demeanor that screamed deception. Nothing. And yet, the evidence was staring me in the face, glowing back at me from the screen of my phone. I didn't text her right away. I wanted to, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. What was I supposed to say? Hey, how's Chicago? Or should I say Rome? The very thought of sending that made my stomach twist. Instead, I spent hours in a fog, pretending to work, but really just pacing the apartment, scrolling through her posts over and over again, hoping for some detail that would prove me wrong. But the more I looked, the more the truth settled in, heavy and suffocating. There were photos of her glass of red wine with a caption about Italian nights. A boomerang of her tossing a coin into the Trevi Fountain. And then one that made me nearly drop my phone, a shot of her reflection in a window, with a man's silhouette faintly visible behind her. His face wasn't clear, but I could see the outline of broad shoulders, leather jacket, and the angle of his arm slung casually near her. My chest tightened so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. That was the breaking point. The moment denial gave way to reality. Emily wasn't in Chicago. She wasn't at a conference. She was in Rome with someone else. It's strange how betrayal doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in like poison. First comes shock, then confusion, then the slow, creeping rage. I cycled through all of them that day, my mind flipping back and forth between memories of our relationship and this new, ugly truth. I thought back to when we first met, in 2013. At a friend's birthday party in the Lower East Side, she had been wearing this vintage dress, laughing so loudly it drew everyone's attention. I was instantly pulled toward her. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she looked at you. From that night, we were inseparable. We spent summers at Coney Island, winters curled up watching Netflix before Netflix and chill was even a phrase. We built a life together, and now, all I could think was, had it all been a lie? I picked up my phone at least a dozen times, typing out messages and then deleting them. I tried calling her once, but she didn't answer. A few hours later, she sent me a text. Conference went well today. Heading to dinner with coworkers? Miss you. I stared at it in disbelief, bile rising in my throat. The audacity of it. She was in Rome with some man, and here she was, lying straight to my face through a text, pretending she was in Chicago. I didn't reply. I couldn't. That night I barely ate. I sat in the dark, nursing a whiskey, watching the city lights blur through the window. I thought about calling one of my friends, maybe telling them what I had discovered. But I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Saying it would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I sat there alone, spiraling deeper into this pit of disbelief and anger. The next day, things got worse. Emily posted a picture of herself in front of the Coliseum. This time, the man was clearly in the shot, his arm draped around her shoulders. She hadn't even tried to crop him out. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and a trimmed beard. They looked like a couple, like two people on a romantic getaway. I felt something inside me snap. My hands trembled, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. That was the moment rage truly hit me. I had been patient, giving her the benefit of the doubt, but there it was. It's undeniable. She was cheating on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something. But instead, I sat there in silence, my mind racing a mile a minute. Questions flooded my head. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Had she lied about other trips? Was this the first time, or had I been blind all along? And then came the memories, the little red flags I had brushed aside. The late nights at the office, the mysterious work dinners, the way she sometimes turned her phone face down when she got messages. I had noticed all of it, but I had convinced myself it was nothing. That was the kind of man I prided myself on being trusting, not paranoid. But maybe that was my biggest mistake. I thought about the time just a few months earlier, when she had gone to Los Angeles for a conference. She had come back glowing, full of stories about networking and beach walks. Had that been a lie too? Was he there with her then? The betrayal cut deeper with every thought. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I typed out a message, my fingers shaking. I hope you're enjoying Rome. Who's the guy? I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. I wasn't ready for her response. I wasn't ready to confront the truth directly, because once I did, there would be no going back. Instead, I decided to wait, to watch, to see how far she would go. It was a twisted, masochistic decision, but I couldn't help myself. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation, no matter how impossible it seemed. Over the next 24 hours, I checked her social media obsessively. Every new post was another knife in the gut. Romantic dinners, strolls by the Tiber, wine glasses clinking under the Roman sky. She didn't tag him, didn't mention him, but he was there. Always there. Meanwhile, she kept texting me lies. Long day at the conference. Can't wait to be home. Chicago's colder than I expected. Thinking of you. Every word felt like gasoline poured on a fire inside me. That weekend was one of the longest of my life. I barely slept, barely ate. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Emily and this man, of their secret life together, of the way she had looked me in the eye at JFK and lied without hesitation. By Sunday night, I knew I couldn't keep silent much longer. She was supposed to fly back Monday morning. She'd told me she'd land at JFK around 10 a.m., but now all I could think was, would she really come back from Rome on time? Would she even come back at all? That question gnawed at me, keeping me awake into the early hours. I kept picturing her walking through arrivals, smiling as if nothing had happened. Could I really look at her the same way again? Could I sit across from her at breakfast, knowing she had been in Rome with another man, while telling me she was in Chicago? The truth was, I already knew the answer. My world had shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning she was supposed to arrive back? I drove to JFK like a man walking into a courtroom, my chest hollow, my hands stiff on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure why I even went. Maybe part of me still wanted to see her, to look her in the eye, to confirm for myself that this wasn't all some cruel, surreal nightmare. Or maybe I was chasing the last sliver of hope, the one whispering that there had to be some explanation, some reason that would make the whole thing less devastating. I parked in the arrivals section, staring at the sliding doors where streams of travelers spilled out, rolling their luggage, reuniting with loved ones. I watched a man scoop his daughter up into his arms, watched couples embrace, and I felt sick. Because I wasn't sure what I'd do when I saw Emily. Hug her. Demand answers? Walk away? 10 minutes stretched into 30. 30 into an hour? Passengers poured out from her supposed Chicago flight, but Emily wasn't among them. My phone buzzed. A text from her, landed safe. Just getting my bag. Meet you at the curb? I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. Landed safe? The Chicago flight had landed an hour ago, and I'd seen every passenger come out. Was she lying even now? I wanted to scream, to run inside, to demand the truth from her face to face. But instead, I typed back, okay. 5 minutes later, she appeared. And God, she looked radiant. A little too radiant, like someone who had been away on a romantic vacation, not grinding through a work conference. She had on a soft cream sweater, her hair slightly tousled, her skin glowing. She wheeled her carry-on behind her, smiling when she spotted me. That smile, once it would have melted me. Now it felt like a knife. She slid into the passenger seat, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. I froze. The scent of her perfume, once comforting, now felt suffocating. I forced myself to mutter something like, "Good trip?" But my throat was tight, my voice hoarse. She launched into some rehearsed story about long hours, boring seminars, how she barely had time to explore Chicago. I gripped the steering wheel, nodding occasionally, my knuckles white. Every word she spoke was another reminder of the lies she was weaving right there in front of me. I wanted to shout. I wanted to pull over, grab my phone, shove the photos in her face and scream, "Chicago? Really? Who's the guy in Rome?" But I didn't. Instead, I drove us home, my mind a storm. That first night back was unbearable. She unpacked, did laundry, acted like everything was normal. I watched her move around the apartment like a stranger wearing the skin of someone I used to love. My chest burned with the urge to confront her, but fear held me back. Fear of her answers. Fear of confirming what I already knew. I barely slept. Lying there beside her, I stared at the ceiling while she breathed steadily, peacefully, as if she hadn't just torn my heart out. I thought about the silhouette of that man in Rome, the way his arm rested around her shoulders like he owned her. Who was he? Was he a coworker? An old friend? Someone she'd been seeing for months? Maybe years? The not knowing was torture. The next day, I tried to focus on work, but my brain refused to cooperate. I fumbled through calls, missed deadlines, and stared blankly at my laptop screen for hours. My boss emailed me about sloppy mistakes, and I barely even cared. My entire life outside of Emily was unraveling, because how could I fix servers or write reports when my whole foundation had cracked? That evening, she suggested we order Thai food and watch a movie. Like nothing had changed. I forced myself to sit beside her on the couch, but I couldn't focus on the film. My mind was stuck on every Instagram post, every lie she had fed me. When her phone buzzed on the coffee table, I glanced at it instinctively. The name flashing across the screen was Mark. My stomach dropped. She snatched it up quickly, mumbling something about a coworker. She typed a response and set it back down, face down, like she always did. That was the moment rage finally outweighed fear. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and sat there shaking. My reflection in the mirror didn't even look like me. Red eyes, hollow cheeks, clenched jaw. I whispered to myself, "She's cheating. She's cheating. Saying it out loud made it more real, but also gave me a strange clarity. I couldn't keep pretending. The fallout wasn't just between Emily and MIT spread like cracks in glass. My friends noticed I was distant. I stopped showing up to poker nights, stopped answering texts. My sister called me one night, worried, asking why I sounded so drained. I wanted to tell her everything, but the shame held me back. Shame that I hadn't seen it sooner. Shame that the woman I loved was deceiving me. Shame that I was too scared to confront her. I started drinking more. Whiskey, beer, whatever dulled the edges. I'd sit by the window late at night, bottle in hand, scrolling through her social media, punishing myself with every photo, every lie. Meanwhile, she carried on like everything was fine, laughing, chatting, kissing me goodnight. The disconnect was maddening. One night, maybe a week after she returned, she fell asleep with her phone on the nightstand. My heart pounded as I stared at it, debating. I'd never been the type to snoop. I believed in trust. But trust was already dead. My hands shook as I picked it up, unlocked it with the code I'd known for years, and opened her messages. There he was. Mark. The texts hit me like a sledgehammer. Messages about Rome. About how magical it had been, how he missed her already. Photos of them together, smiling in front of fountains, holding hands by the Colosseum. Words like love and next time and forever. I couldn't breathe. I set the phone down, my chest heaving, my head spinning. My vision blurred with tears I hadn't even realized were falling. It wasn't just cheating. It wasn't just a fling. She loved him, or at least she thought she did. The woman I'd built my life with. The woman I thought I'd marry was planning a future with someone else. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not the hot, explosive kind of rage, but a cold, sharp fury that settled deep in my bones. I wanted to wake her up, to scream until the walls shook. I wanted to destroy every trace of her in that apartment. But I didn't. Instead, I lay back down, staring at the ceiling again, silently breaking apart while she slept inches away from me. The fallout seeped into every part of my life after that. Work, friends, sleep, appetite, everything crumbled. I walked around like a ghost, my mind consumed with images of her in Rome, her laughter, her lies. People noticed. My boss pulled me aside, asking if I was okay. I muttered something about stress. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always declined, but the worst part wasn't what it did to me. It was what it did to my faith in love, in people. I had believed in us. Truly believed. And now, every memory felt tainted. The beach trips, the late-night conversations, the little quirks I once adored, all of it was poisoned by the knowledge that she had chosen someone else. I started questioning everything. Was she ever really mine? Had she been lying for months? Years? Had I been nothing but a placeholder until someone better came along? The fallout wasn't just emotional. It was existential. I didn't know who I was anymore, and I knew sooner or later I would have to confront her. I didn't realize it then, but that wanting to move was the seed of whatever came next. It started as something ugly and vengeful and slowly shifted into something steadier. Something that belonged to me again. It was the week before Thanksgiving, November 2019, when I finally decided I could no longer be the man who sat in the corner of his own life, while someone else rearranged the furniture. I remember the exact day because there was a gray drizzle outside. It's the kind New York gets that smells faintly of wet asphalt and roasted chestnuts from the vendor on the corner. I woke up early, walked over to my laptop, and booked a flight, not to Rome and not to Chicago, but to Austin, Texas. It was random in a way, but there was method to it. A city I'd never given much thought to, one where Emily had never been, a place far enough away to break patterns. Before I left, I called my friend Sam, who I'd known since college. He answered on the second ring, his voice a tired, friendly rasp. I told him I needed to get out of Brooklyn for a few days. He didn't ask questions. Sam was the kind of friend who could read my temperature. He'd come by the apartment the night before with 2 beers and a duffel bag, and we'd sat in the living room watching old clips of The Office, laughing in that brittle, necessary way. He stayed over, and in the morning he drove me to the airport. I remember feeling childish guilt leaving her there, the life we had, but also a small, decisive thrill. For the first time in weeks, I was choosing myself. Austin hit differently. It had that live music pulse and a messy warmth that you don't get in Brooklyn. I spent the first night wandering 6th Street, which was loud with people and neon. The kind of chaos that forced my brain to keep up or get left behind. I ate tacos at 2 a.m. and listened to strangers talk like they were confessing to a priest. It was exactly the anonymity I needed. For the first time since the Trevi Fountain, I slept without waking up, fixated on a phone screen. But movement alone wouldn't change the fact at the center of everything, the betrayal. I had to make sense of it. So I started compiling. In Austin, sitting under a sagging motel lamp, I opened a blank document and began to write down everything I remembered. Dates, flights, her stories, places she'd worked at, the little lies folded into truth so seamlessly I hadn't noticed. October 2018, LA Conference. March 2019, a business trip to Barcelona that lasted a week longer than she'd said. The list coagulated a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. She had been building a parallel life methodically, carefully. Or maybe she had been following something that seduced her the way an addiction does. The glamour of someone else's attention. At first, the list was a thing of fury, a ledger of betrayals. Then slowly, it became a map. I realized Mark was not an accident. He was a person who had carefully woven himself into the gaps where I had been too trusting or too tired. That realization complicated the righteous anger. The world rarely hands out villains with one-dimensional faces. People were messy. And the moral clarity I'd been craving dissolved into a gray fog of motives and choices. Back in New York, I didn't immediately confront Emily. Instead, I changed the dynamic in small ways that felt like taking back pieces of myself. I changed the passwords to accounts she technically knew. I cleared out old emails I'd never opened. I started volunteering on Saturday mornings at a local food pantry. There was something restorative about lifting boxes and sorting cans with strangers. Their problems were different, but solid, tangible. I liked the physical proof of work. It gave me back a sense of capability. I also started therapy. There is a cliché about men not seeing therapists, but the cliché exists because it's still necessary. I signed up with a counselor near Union Square named Karen, an earthy woman who wore wool sweaters and had a way of asking questions that made you answer them aloud even if you didn't want to. The very act of paying to speak about my pain made it real in a different way. In those sessions, I discovered layers of myself I hadn't known, the infantilized boy who didn't want to disturb a peace that might be fragile, the person who used logic as a shield against intimacy, the part that mistook tolerance for strength. Therapy didn't fix any of it overnight, but it taught me to orient myself toward action rather than collapse. Action took different forms. On a Monday, I confronted Emily in a way I hadn't the first time. Not with fury, but with a list. I laid out the dates, the flights, the inconsistencies, the map I had made in Austin. She sat there across the small kitchen table, hands twisted in her scarf. Yeah, for a moment she looked like someone else's actress. She didn't deny it, not at first. There was a slow, terrible unraveling in her face, then confession. She said the words I'd been both dreading and desperate to hear. She had fallen in love with someone else. She said she hadn't planned to hurt me. She said she had been cruel and selfish. She seemed to collapse into honesty like a building into rubble. Hearing it didn't lift the hurt. It sharpened it. But it shifted the energy, from guessing to seeing. There was a sad gratitude in that, the clarity of it. I told her I needed space. She asked for time. I left that day and slept on Sam's couch. The city rushing by like a thing that had been happening to someone else. Part of me wanted a transaction money. A lease broken, some visible exchange to mark the change as if wounds could be itemized. Another part of me wanted to make Mark hurt in the same way I did, to punish him for occupying a life he had no right to. I considered calling him. I thought of confronting him at his apartment, of vandalizing his car, of leaving angry anonymous messages. The fantasy of revenge tasted like salt on my tongue, immediate and not at all satisfying. It was a juvenile satisfaction. As days turned into weeks, I realized these ideas were traps, shortcuts that would keep me from the harder work of rebuilding. Instead, I did something quieter and more effective. I reclaimed my social calendar. I took weekend trips, not to escape but to rediscover. I went to Joshua Tree in December, walking between boulders like someone learning to be okay with silence. I took a photography class, something Emily had always teased me about, that I wouldn't start a hobby without her. I cooked meals that had no interest in being pleasing to anyone else. I learned to make a mean shakshuka. I returned to the things I'd shelved to be reliable, my guitar, my running training, and I invested energy into them. Those small victories stitched something back together. There was also an element of strategic transparency. I began posting again on social media, but not the performative kind. I uploaded a picture of a cassette player I'd found in a thrift shop. A photo of sun through a rain-streaked window. Short captions about reading Joan Didion at 2 a.m. It was my life, reclaimed in small, honest strokes. I deleted photos of us together from the feed, not out of spite, but because I needed the visual space to not be haunted. It felt childish again, but it worked. The absence of her image in my digital life slowly made the idea of being without her less like a wound and more like a state that could be tolerated, then eventually embraced. There were difficult moments. Thanksgiving was brutal. I spent it with my sister and her family upstate. Her nephew ran around the yard with a football. The house smelled of roasted turkey and sage. I sat on the porch at dusk and looked out at the trees, and for a long time I thought I might cry. But I didn't. Instead, I really talked with my sister about everything I'd been through. She didn't have grand platitudes. She gave me practical support, which was more helpful than any romanticized recovery narrative. She helped me file paperwork related to bills in our joint name, and she reminded me to call the bank about credit card accounts. She taught me how to be uncompromising about the logistics of separation, which is its own kind of therapy. One winter night, weeks later, there was a knock at my door. It was Mark. He looked younger in person, less like the silhouette in the photos and more like a guy who had made a terrible mistake. He said he wanted to talk. I almost didn't open the door, but curiosity and some desire to close a loop made me let him in. He sat on the couch, looking embarrassed, told some version of the truth. He had met Emily through a mutual friend, while she was on an actual work trip to London. They'd connected over art and wine and had been seeing each other intermittently. He claimed he didn't know she was in a relationship at the start, but when he found out he felt trapped, but also deeply involved. He apologized more than once, and I could see real remorse shadowing his face. Hearing him say sorry didn't soothe me. It didn't need to. I wasn't a character in a movie who needed the antagonist to confess for the music to swell. But there was a human in front of me who had also been making decisions and living with consequences. I told him to leave. I told him he had the right to his life and the responsibility for the mess he'd made. He left with his shoulders slumped. I closed the door and felt nothing dramatic. No cathartic scream, no theatrical breakdown. I felt a numbness that slowly became steadier. Turning the tables wasn't about winning. It never was. If anything, it was about recentering my world so that it no longer orbited the pain. That meant boundaries clear, steady lines I refused to cross. Time has a way of flattening mountains into hills, but it doesn't erase the memories. By mid-2020, chaos of betrayal and heartbreak had settled into something I could navigate without losing my grip. The world itself had changed in ways no one anticipated. The pandemic was everywhere. Masks, empty streets, the eerie quiet of a city that never used to sleep. It was a strange backdrop for personal healing, but perhaps it was the perfect one. The enforced isolation gave me space to process, to reflect, to rebuild without distractions. I spent long mornings walking through Prospect Park, headphones in, letting music fill the empty spaces that had been occupied by her presence. I could feel the old knot of anger loosen just a little, replaced by a quiet determination that life would go on, and that I would shape it with my own hands. I began to recognize patterns in my emotions. Moments when grief crept back, waves of loneliness, flashes of anger. Each time, I allowed myself to acknowledge them, sit with them, and then let them pass. It wasn't about erasing her or pretending she hadn't hurt me. It was about reclaiming the power to decide how her choices impacted my life. Work became a lifeline. Projects that once bored or exhausted me now had weight because I brought my full self to them. I took on clients I genuinely liked, expanded my skill set, even started mentoring a junior colleague who reminded me of myself at 22, hopeful, naive, but ready to learn. Guiding someone else helped me recognize how far I'd come and how much strength I'd gained through the ordeal. Relationships started to matter again, too. Lila, the woman from my photography class, became a steady presence. She wasn't a replacement for Emily. She was someone new, someone who saw me for who I had become rather than who I had been. Our evenings were simple: cooking together, going for long walks, sharing playlists and podcasts. She asked questions I hadn't considered asking myself, and I discovered new layers of honesty and openness that I'd forgotten existed. She didn't ask me to forget, just to live forward, and I began to. Yet every once in a while, the memory of Emily's betrayal would surface. I'd see an image of Rome on Instagram or smell perfume that reminded me of that October morning at JFK. And for a moment, my stomach would drop. But I had learned not to linger in those moments. They were reminders, not prisons. I kept my boundaries firm. No checking her social media. No trying to glean updates about her life. No letting curiosity drag me backward. In losing control, I had found clarity. By early 2021, I had made tangible changes in my life. I moved out of the Brooklyn apartment we had shared and found a small loft in Williamsburg. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. The space felt alive, a reflection of my own energy rather than a monument to memories I didn't want. I filled it with books, plants, photos I had taken on my trips, and items that reminded me of personal victories rather than past failures. Each object was a stake in my independence. Emily reached out once, via email, almost a year after the Rome incident. She wanted to catch up, to apologize again, to explain herself. I read the message once, deleted it, and didn't respond. That was the ultimate turning point, understanding that closure doesn't require someone else's explanation. Closure is internal. It is claiming the narrative of your own life and refusing to let anyone else write the chapters for you. I think about betrayal often, because it leaves scars that can't be ignored. But those scars have become part of who I am. They remind me to trust wisely, to set boundaries, to recognize red flags, without allowing fear to dominate my choices. They remind me that heartbreak is not an endpoint, but a crucible, reshaping character in ways that nothing else can. There were small victories along the way. Finishing a photography project that I had started months before, feeling proud of my progress. Running a half marathon and crossing the finish line despite doubts. Laughing genuinely with Lila and realizing that joy could exist alongside pain. I began to view life with a tempered optimism, cautious, aware, but willing to invest in experiences and people who respected my existence. The pandemic, oddly enough, accelerated some of this clarity. Cities slowed, people retreated, and in that quiet, I had no excuse to avoid myself. I read, I journaled, I planned trips for when the world reopened. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. And every step, every small act of reclaiming autonomy was a quiet affirmation. I survived. I was not defined by her choices, nor by her betrayal. I was defined by how I rose after it. In the fall of 2021, I finally returned to Rome, alone this time. Walking past the Trevi Fountain, I paused. I remembered that day, that image, that man beside her, the sickness in my stomach, the feeling that my life had shattered. I let myself feel it for a moment, then exhaled, letting the wind carry away the weight. I threw a coin into the fountain, made a wish that had nothing to do with anyone else, and walked away. It felt small, but monumental. The act of placing myself in that city on my terms rather than as a ghost of someone else's narrative. By 2022, life had resumed its unpredictable rhythm. Work, love, friendship, and self-discovery, interwove in ways that reminded me of resilience's quiet power. Betrayal had been a crucible, yes, but it had also been a catalyst. I no longer feared love, though I approached it with caution and wisdom. I learned to listen to intuition without letting paranoia take hold. I learned that truth is something you hold on to, even when others abandon it. Looking back now, I realize that the airport morning, the Instagram post, the shock, the rage, the heartbreak, all of it was part of a story I never wanted to live through, but needed to. And in surviving it, I became someone more whole, more self-aware, more alive. I found joy in small moments, a good cup of coffee, a well-composed photograph, a shared smile with someone who truly saw me. I had reclaimed my life, my peace, my sense of self. The memory of betrayal still flickers. Like a warning sign on a road I've traveled before, but I don't stop at the sign. I drive past it, windows down, wind in my hair, alive in a world that feels mine again. I am not the man who watched from the airport curb, helpless and broken. I am the man who walked away, rebuilt, and returned stronger. And in that strength, I have found freedom, clarity, and a quiet kind of happiness that no one can take from me.